I've been promising stories that are surprising and interesting. Here's the first surprise, at least I think it will be a surprise for some of you. Recall that Dvorak was interested in folk music at a time when folk music was becoming popular music. During his stay in America, Dvorak was interested in and collected examples of indigenous American folk and popular music. Standing astride the headwaters of American popular music is Stephen Foster. He was a new thing in the world, or at least in America, but honestly, he had few peers or progenitors elsewhere. He was the first to think he could make a living writing and selling popular songs, not as a performer or a theatrical composer staging his music, or by being retained as a songsmith by some producer or singing star, but simply as an independent, popular songwriter, writing songs to be sold as sheet music. And he had some success at first, selling songs to publishers, sometimes for tidy sums of money. His songs became immensely popular, but there was little to prevent other unauthorized printers from pirating and selling his songs once they became known and sought after. The idea of copyright for printed texts had not yet been much extended to cover such things as sheet music, and even less so sheet music for folk songs or popular songs. The idea of royalties from future printings, even if by the authorized publishers, did not yet exist. Whatever theoretical copyrights he had were for practical purposes unenforceable. Thus, he sold his songs outright for a one-time fee. During his heyday in the 1850s, he averaged about $1,400 a year. Not a fortune at the time, but more than most people saw. But his fortunes declined. His wife left him, and he died young, in 1864, only 37 years old. Sick, in a cheap Bowery hotel room in New York, he fainted and cracked his head against a wash basin. Bleeding profusely, he was taken to hospital, but died 3 days later, penniless and alone. Well, not quite penniless. He had in his pockets fractional currency, like our modern paper money, but denominated in amounts less than $1. 38 cents in Confederate script. He had 3 actual pennies, and a scrap of paper reading only, "Dear friends and gentle hearts." Foster's music had been hugely popular in the 1850s and 60s, and remained popular and well-known in the 1890s, being no further removed from Stephen Foster's heyday than we are from Michael Jackson's or Madonna's. Today, a century and a half later, some of his songs are still well-known. Romantics cherish Beautiful Dreamer. Oh Susanna and Camptown Races have become children's songs. 2 states, Kentucky and Florida, have adopted Stephen Foster songs as their state song. My Old Kentucky Home for Kentucky, and The Old Folks at Home for Florida, which some of you will recognize by its first line as Way Down Upon the Swanee River. However, they did so not without controversy. Foster wrote popular music, and the popular theater of his day included the Blackface minstrel show. Several of his tunes, including those 2 state songs, were written in this genre. This taints them with the association of racism for many modern audiences. For the home in My Old Kentucky Home was, after all, a slave's cabin, and The Old Folks at Home has its protagonist longing for the old plantation. In 1851, when Foster wrote The Old Folks at Home, slavery was still a fact of life in America, and a slave could be sold away at the will or whim of his owner, perhaps never again to see his home and family. That's the image Stephen Foster presents, a man who longs to once again see his home, his brother, and his parents. The image was meant to be sentimental and sympathetic. Foster expressly stated his intention was to elevate the blackface genre, to present his black characters with full human emotions rather than as the trashy and offensive, in quotes, portrayals common in the minstrel song. He wrote the very popular Nellie Was a Lady, in which a slave husband grieves for his wife who had just died the night before. It is said to mark the first time in American popular culture that a black woman was referred to as a lady, rather than a girl, or woman, female, mammy, or worse. And he didn't allow derogatory cartoons of slaves on his sheet music, though obviously he had no control over unauthorized editions. But he did write for the blackface minstrelsy. He wrote in dialect. And his songs use language that today is an embarrassment for both performer and audience, even though it was not usually the most offensive language then in common usage. It did not help his reputation that later, after Reconstruction, especially for Southern audiences, longing for the old plantation could be heard not as a slave sold, longing for the family he may never see again, but as a black free man, longing for a return to life before emancipation. Often it was in this spirit that Foster's music and the old folks at home was loved by the generations that brought segregation and Jim Crow laws, which were themselves named for a famous minstrel song, not by Stephen Foster, Jump Jim Crow. For these reasons, his music is performed less often today. Its use as official state songs has been repeatedly criticized. Modern would-be lyricists, some of dubious merit, have sometimes been forced to rewrite offending lines for the official uses, and Foster's music is now mostly absent from primary schools. Someone else can tease out all of the real racism and false accusations of racism in Stephen Foster's songs. My point is only that they were very popular and very much American. Dvorak was attracted to popular folk music and explored them and wrestled with them musically, and they influenced his work. The surprise is the connection between Dvorak's Humoresque and Stephen Foster's The Old Folks at Home. In the words of Maxwell Marcuse, as he wrote in his book Tin Pan Alley and Gaslight, published 1959, the wistful and plaintive appeal of its melody, Humoresque, is enhanced in the hearts of most Americans by the fact that it can be played as harmonizing and melodic background to Stephen Foster's The Old Folks at Home. This fact was known very early on, and early phonograph records attest to it. There is a 1915 recording of The Old Folks at Home, arranged by the famous violinist Ephraim Zimbalist, to be sung by his new wife, they had just married in London in June of 1914, the acclaimed soprano Alma Gluck, in which the violin plays Humoresque as she sings Foster's lyric and melody. Focus your attention on the violin while Alma sings in dialect. For those who want to hear the whole thing, it's available at the Internet Archive, the Library of Congress, and here on YouTube. Links in the description. By the way, for old television fans, Ephraim and Alma were the parents of the actor Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. of 77 Sunset Strip and The FBI. Also in 1915, the tenor Walter van Brunt made the connection between Humoresque and the old folks at home explicit on an Edison Blue Amberol cylinder, number 2612, called the Humoresque Song, adapted from Dvorak's melody. It also features an unnamed second vocalist. A bit of it follows shortly. It's available under a Creative Commons non-commercial license from the Cylinder Digitization Project at the University of California, Santa Barbara Library. Link in the description. But first, Walter van Brunt has a bit of an interesting story of his own. In 1917, he changed his name to Walter Scanlon. Some say because of anti-German prejudice during World War I, though the name was probably Dutch, not Deutsch. It was Van, not Von, but there was anti-German sentiment during the war, and Brunt did sound rather Germanic. Others say it was to take commercial advantage of the fame of an Irish singer who was also conveniently named Walter Scanlon, who, though famous, had died without making any phonograph records. The two theories are not mutually exclusive, but everyone agrees that when Walter got married, the future Mrs. Scanlon didn't know about the previous Mrs. Van Brunt, from whom Walter had neglected to get divorced. Following, there was a very public celebrity bigamy scandal. Here's some of his The Humoresque Song.
Oh, then in that melody I seem to hear another song, a song that brings another scene to view. And its echo in my heart awoke the memory of one my heart is ever turning to. On the dear old Swanee River, I dream once more. That song of long ago that thrilled my soul with rapture as its melody steals through the twilight glow. 'Twas a song that mother sang in childhood days so long ago. 'Twas just a